throughout an interaction, if you want the interaction to move towards physicality, if you want it to move towards sex, if you want it to move, if you want it to progress, at some point you have to show some interest because all of those moves show interest. Problem is, if you show too much interest, you come off as needy or obvious. However, if you show interest, positive emotional spike, combined with some disinterest, negative emotional spike, you can get away with showing much more interest without giving away your power, without ruining the sexual tension, etc. Hey, what's up? Welcome back for another episode of the Todd V Show. I know it's been a while, but we do have some insanely good questions for you today, specifically on the topic of verbal game, meaning what to say to girls, when and why, literally the words that come out of your mouth for every specific situation. All right, today's question is, contrast, neg or push-pull, and an insult, the dichotomy. Okay, so all kinds of problems with this. First of all, this is not a question. It's literally like an order. It's like, do this thing. But also, there's three things, so it's not a dichotomy. I'm actually going to answer this, but I'm going to add a fourth one as well because I want to be really complete. So we're going to look at what is a neg, what is a push-pull, what is a disqualifier, that's the one I'm adding, and then what is an insult. Because it's very, very important to understand this distinction. If you do understand this distinction, you're going to be very powerful in your communication with women. So we'll go in the order given. Actually, we'll go insult first, because that's just very easy, and then we'll go to all the others. Insult's very easy. What is an insult? An insult is when you say something overtly rude or mean. That's it. That's an insult. You say something overtly rude or mean. You're fat, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're a waste of space and a waste of life, whatever. These are insults. We do not use insults in game. To be fair, you probably just don't even use insults in life, okay? What's the point? What is achieved by an insult, especially a direct insult like that? It makes you appear rude. It makes you appear angry or reactive and uncalibrated. It probably doesn't even have the full intended effect. If the point of saying the thing is to piss off the other person, it will do that, but it probably will have less impact than if you did something subtler like one of these other things, interestingly enough. So let's just flat out say, just avoid insults, okay? Avoid insults in game and probably avoid insults in life. But the question you probably have is, what is the difference between all these other things and insults? So let's talk first about the push-pull. Now, what is a push-pull? A push-pull is where you're going to say something that triggers a positive emotion and something that triggers a negative emotion. Okay, now, of course, I said we're not doing insults, so the thing you're saying that triggers the negative emotion shouldn't be an insult, but there are a lot of other things that can trigger a negative emotion. For example, someone being judged in a particular way could be something that triggers a negative emotional spike. Or withdrawing attention from somebody could trigger a negative emotional spike. So there's a lot of things besides insults that trigger negative emotional spikes. And we're actually going to get to that a lot more specifically when we get to negs and disqualifiers, because typically within a push-pull, you're going to use something along the lines of a neg or a disqualifier as the negative spike, as the negative emotional pull of the push-pull. So just put a pin in that for a second. Remember, we're going to come back to that. But for now, remember that a push-pull is something positive and something negative, right? So if I said, do you know what I love about you? Absolutely nothing. Has the positive, do you know what I love about you? Has the negative, absolutely nothing, right? Or I thought I loved you until you said that, right? Positive, I thought I loved you, but in the past tense. And then until you said that, which is the negative part of it, right? Another one, if you want to go negative spike and then positive spike, it's so annoying how cute you are, right? It's so annoying is a negative spike, how cute you are is a positive spike, you have the negative and the positive. And what you're doing is you're basically giving this emotional roller coaster. Positive spike, positive spike. And it's a very intense experience for someone because they're feeling validated, devalidated, devalidated, validated. And from moment to moment, they don't know where they stand. It makes the person want to qualify themselves to you. It makes the person want to prove themselves to you. It makes the person wonder whether you like them or not, or how much you like them. It keeps sexual tension. So there's all these different good reasons why having that combination of positive and negative emotional spikes is good. The other thing that a push-pull does that's really brilliant is throughout an interaction, if you want the interaction to move towards physicality, if you want it to move towards sex, if you want it to move, if you want it to progress, at some point you have to show some interest because all of those moves show interest. Problem is, if you show too much interest, you come off as needy or obvious. However, if you show interest, positive emotional spike, combined with some disinterest, negative emotional spike, you can get away with showing much more interest without giving away your power, without ruining the sexual tension, etc. So the push-pull is absolutely brilliant. And what is it? It's a positive emotional spike with a negative emotional spike. Technically, you could follow the format of a push-pull and have the negative spike be an insult, but that would be not as good as if it wasn't an insult. And again, I recommend just eliminating insults entirely. Okay, so something that's flat out mean, rude, absolutely like unsalvageable, there's no nice part in it, just don't use those. Okay, but you can have a negative emotional spike with the positive emotional spike. And if you actually go back and were to play through each and every one of these negative emotional spikes, none of them is actually an insult. It might be a statement that says, I had a certain emotion or reaction toward you, but not you are a particular thing, right? So you could say like, the way you're dressed is not the style I prefer, as opposed to you're badly dressed. You're badly dressed is an insult. You're not dressed in the style I prefer is a preference. That's a very key distinction, which we're going to get to, in more depth when it comes to the neg and the disqualifier. So next up, we have the disqualifier, which I kind of touched on a little bit with the push-pull, right? What are you doing? It's a negative statement. It's a we wouldn't get along, or it's not going to work out, or something that is actually distancing or breaking rapport. It's making you sort of less connected and close with the person, and making it more a situation where you're pushing them away. Maybe they need to chase or they need to earn something, or they're more uncertain about you. The difference between a disqualifier and a push-pull is that a disqualifier lacks the positive spike, right? A push-pull has the positive spike and the negative spike. The disqualifier just has the negative spike. Also, with the disqualifier, the negative spike is of a particular character and nature, which is that it is specifically about the relationship between you and the girl, and it's specifically about whether or not it's going to work or whether or not you like her, right? So there are certain push-pulls that are not really that much about you and her, right? So for example, you could say something like you're surprised that she wasn't she didn't get a good grade on her math test, right? That's a negative thing, but it's not really about you and her in the relationship. It's not about whether you specifically like her, right? So you could have a push-pull that has the negative spike, not really relevant and not really man to woman and not about you deciding about the relationship directly. It just has that emotional roller coaster of positives and negatives. The disqualifier, one, again, no positive spike. Two is that specifically the content is about whether or not you and the girl are going to get along, whether or not you like her, whether or not this relationship is going to work. So it's much more pointed and much more sort of like, it's much firmer and stronger in terms of what it's doing with regards to the relationship. One, because there is no positive to go with it. So it definitely kind of punches her in the gut a little bit. She's like, oh, shit, what? It's not going to work out, right? And there's no positive to like latch onto and like, oh, but there's a positive, right? So it's stronger in that way. It's also stronger in the sense that it is directly about the relationship. So it tends to be a bigger move overall than a push-pull would be. It tends to be more impactful. However, it also tends to be more risky. So take that with a grain of salt. And then finally, we have the neg, the old school neg, which is the one that most guys think of as an insult. But the thing about the neg is, number one, again, it should not be an insult. And number two, it actually, if done well, should be unintentional. In fact, if anything, it should be sort of dressed up as a compliment. The idea of a neg is that it is absolutely not an insult. What it is, it's a backwards compliment, or it's a compliment that has the reverse of the intended effect. So it comes off like you're trying to be nice, and in being nice, the honesty just came through, and there was something that might provoke insecurity. And notice I didn't even say it's negative. It's just something that might provoke insecurity. It's something that might put the girl in her head a little bit. It's something that might make the girl wonder a little bit. So just to be clear, the neg, again, is not an insult. It's not even an overt action you are doing to her. What it is, it's a negative compliment. So it's dressed up, it's phrased as a compliment. However, the effect it has is to trigger insecurity rather than to trigger validation. And the easiest way to kind of explain negs is just through examples and explaining the examples. So here's some stock negs. One is like, you blink a lot. Right? You blink a lot. Is it bad or good to blink a lot? It's not necessarily either one. I mean, it might be considered weird to blink a lot, but that said, you have very hydrated eyes if you do, right? And what's the appropriate amount of blinking? Who's to even say? So it's just a statement. It's just a statement. But when someone hears that statement, what does it do? It causes them to think about the act of blinking, which is an involuntary function. It makes them think internally rather than externally. It literally puts them in their head. And it might provoke some level of insecurity. It might provoke some level of wanting to qualify oneself. And it might provoke some level of reactiveness. Okay, so that's an example. Another example that I really like, this is a neg opener that someone I know used to use a lot, was basically, I love that sweater. It's so cool that you're trying to bring the 80s back, right? So basically what you're saying is that sweater is not trendy and doesn't fit in. That sweater is like basically of the style of 40 years ago or 35 years ago or something like that, right? You're not in style, but it's phrased as a compliment. But someone's like, what do you mean the 80s? That's not what I was going for, etc. So it might provoke insecurity, right? It's not an insult. It's phrased as a compliment, but it might provoke insecurity. So it has this sort of disqualifying nature to it, or even a little bit of the push-pull nature to it in the sense that it's phrased as a compliment, but it provoked insecurity. But it seems very unintentional. That's the key thing about the neg, is that it's unintentional. And that's what makes it differentiated from a push-pull, which is flirty and intentional, or a disqualifier, which is quite intentional, right? And it's also not an insult. Why? Because one, it's not phrased as an insult. And two, because there's nothing strongly, overtly, unredeemably negative about it. Okay? Anytime with any of these lines, the neg, the push-pull, the disqualifier, if someone were to get offended by it and call it out as an insult, you should be able to look them dead in the eye and quite literally and honestly explain to them why it's not an insult. So for example, if you said something along the lines of, wow, you're actually not super boring, right? That's kind of like, that's probably like a push-pull, really. That's probably the closest. It's a little bit of a push-pull, a little bit of neg. It's like in between push-pull, neg, but mostly a push-pull, right? But if someone says, what do you mean? You thought I was boring? Like, no, I actually just told you you're not boring. I literally just gave you a compliment. And that's literally true. So it may have had a positive and negative. It may have provoked insecurity, but it literally is a compliment if you really dig into it. And that's the point. The point is that you're having these effects. You're triggering all the same emotions. You're putting on the emotional roller coaster. You're disqualifying the relationship and making her chase. You're doing all these things, but you're never, ever insulting. All right, so hopefully this makes a lot of these things make sense to you. Hopefully this clarifies how you can get away with a lot of things. Hopefully this clarifies how you can trigger emotions while still being polite. Hopefully this clarifies how you can get out of it if the girl ever complains that one of the things you said is rude, because again, literally they're not. None of them are ever an insult. So hopefully you enjoyed that and found it informative. I want to point out this is an area of game called verbal game. What to say and how to say it, how to use your words in communication to establish attraction, establish comfort, to get a resulting game. If you want more on this topic, check it out at verbalgameacademy.com. I have an entire course over there that goes into incredible depth. You're going to love it. Go check it out right now.